I have a terrific story to tell you guys. Once upon a time in Black entrepreneur history, there lived an African American man named John Don Juan Knight. He was born in the state of Alabama, enslaved, but went on to become a freaking millionaire in Guatemala City, Guatemala. Let's get into it. Now, just like I said, he was born in Alabama, enslaved in the United States of America. He was born around 1844 and 1845. Now, his birth name was just John Knight. And we'll get into it later how he became Don Juan. Now, his father was unknown. And the reason his father is unknown is because during slavery, we would be sold off at something called a slave auction. His mother was pregnant at the time his father was sold off to a plantation in Georgia. So he never ever was able to meet his biological father. So as a young boy, he helped his mother in the fields. And when he got old enough, the slavers, the Upton family, decided they would allow specifically him to have an education. Now, Miss Upton was a school teacher, and so she, in the evening, after he would finish working on the fields, would bring him to teach him how to read and write, which was at the time illegal, but she did it anyway. By the time he was 16 years old, John Knight was well known in the county. However, it was in 1960 that he was sold off on that slave auction block because Mr. Upton passed away. So from there, he ended up going to Central Alabama on a cotton plantation. And then there came the Civil War. His new slaver entered into the Confederate Army. And when he did that, he left John Knight in charge of part of the plantation. John Knight's job was to ensure that the cotton was gathered and sold to New Orleans, getting the best market price until the war ended. Now, after the war ended, of course, John Knight was now free, as well as the rest of the enslaved. And from there, he walked to the city of New Orleans and ended up working as a wharf laborer, handling the fruits from Central America. Now, he saved all his money, right? And while he was excellent at doing his duties, his employer chose him to go to Yucatan, which is in Central America. And he was being sent there to manage the packaging of the fruits being sent to New Orleans from Central America. It's with this location that his millions started rolling in. Let me tell you how. So when he got there, there was a revolution going on, and one leader had been ousted and a new leader had come in. And this is in Guatemala. Therefore, he set his sights on gaining favor with the new administration. Therefore, he proposed for a concession of 50,000 acres, suitable for pineapple and bananas. Then he would go to New Orleans and convince the wholesalers, the wholesaler fruit dealers who dominated that market at that time in the United States, to agree to purchase 400,000 British pounds of Guatemalan fruits. And guess what? The Guatemalan government accepted, and the deal was made in New Orleans, creating the trade of millions of pounds annually. Then he got even more concessions because he proved he could turn a freaking profit. And business boomed in the U.S. and in Guatemala. It was by 1871 that John Knight was the largest employer of labor in northern Guatemala. Now, not only was he the largest employer there, okay, the white employers had given up on trying to get the natives to work how they wanted them to work, right? But see, when John Don Juan Knight came through, right, he'd already been enslaved before, okay? And he'd already been in charge of these things. And he also knew how to freaking treat people. So the natives were more willing to work for John Knight than they were for the white people. And he'd become famous for, quote, the zeal he imparted on all who labored, end quote, in his business. So now in about 1878, he started a coffee growing business in Guatemala. He'd gotten some New England money to help him start that up, and he invested his own money. Also, the Guatemalan government was ready to give him any freaking thing he wanted because he already proved himself time and time again by bringing in so much money into the country. So they gave him advantages in shipping concessions. Of course, his coffee farms blew up, okay? They were financially successful. And literally all of his businesses and all of his investments were felt all across the country. Commercially, financially, you name it, he was felt. As a matter of fact, he became the top consultant for anything Guatemala as far as the commercial businesses and everything else were concerned, okay? So anything coming their way, they would always consult with Mr. John Don Juan Knight. And John Knight opened his own bank, and it was the most secure bank in the country as well. He opened that in the 1890s. He was known as the most honest man in Guatemala. Even the people who work for him, yeah, they put their money in his bank too. So his businesses included banana plantations, coffee farms, vanilla bean farms, gold mines, steamboat stocks, vast mahogany forests. Okay. Wharf investments, and even the government of Guatemala had to borrow money from him. Now, Knight's wealth was estimated at being about $10 million. So let me get back to his gold mines. So his gold mines employed about 100 men, and his gold mines yielded more gold than most all the other ones in Central America. His yield came in third to Honduras and Costa Rica. That's a lot of gold. Knight was also an inventor, having invented machinery to crush the ore that came from his mines. And he created a system of tramways, making it easier for workers to haul. And also, peep this, there was a railway that went all across Guatemala. Guess who invested in that? He made that happen. He was responsible for raising all the money for that railway. Now, let me get into his home. I want to get into the man right now, the man. So, of course, I told you his name was John at his birth. However, when he moved to Guatemala, he learned Spanish. And so he changed his name to Juan, which is the equivalent of John. So now we get John Don Juan Knight. He married a native woman in 1872. And this even secured his bond and trust with the native people. They had 7 children, and all of his children received an education in the United States. Now, Don Juan, he was an awesome giver. He loved to give, and he gave to charities. He even donated a lot of money to the National Hospital in Guatemala. And his home was fabulous. It was a travel must-see for any visitors coming into the country. So let me get into his home. It was 2 stories, but it had 35 large rooms, okay? And his dining room was the freaking main attraction. Why? That entire room was finished in polished mahogany and plate glass mirrors. The floors in the dining room were made of the rarest wood in Central America. And there was not another floor in the Western world made like it. Now, the home stood on 3 acres of beautifully designed land, and he also had French and Italian statues. Now, don't look for any photos of him because you might not find them. He was superstitious and he did not allow photos to be taken of himself. Now, as far as him coming back to visit America, yes, he would always visit Alabama, and people in Alabama also remembered who he was. He actually met with the son of his enslaver, and he ended up giving him a job in Guatemala. They were broke. Now, you're like, why would he do something like that? Well, the thing is, he wasn't mistreated, see? And when he saw Miss Upton, the woman who taught him how to read and write, he saw that she was ill and broke. And he remembered how she taught him how to read and write. So what he did was he invested in her caretaking until the day she died. So where he used to work for them, her son ended up working for him. Wow. In the end, Juan McKnight became known as the financial ruler of Central America, and also the Black Vanderbilt. And that's some Black entrepreneur history.